Hello there, and welcome to this video. My name is Matt Petrowski. In this video, we are going to be taking a look at a topic related to FileMaker, and that is knowing your field types. Now, this may seem like a boring topic. I already know what the field types are, but maybe you don't. So let's take a look. You can follow along as I switch to my desktop here, and we can take a look at knowing the field types. Now, this is the first lesson in my segment about fields and calculations. I'm breaking Learning FileMaker into a couple of groups. The first, I don't know how many it was, 13, 14, 15 videos, I don't know, you can check on YouTube, were all about, let's switch to my desktop, make sure I'm there. They were all about learning the environment. Now, you're going to learn your environment, or the FileMaker environment, as you go along. There's so many things in the environment, I could actually spend, I don't know, 50 videos on the environment, but I want to progress through this series and make sure that you're learning more and more about FileMaker. So we're going to go through some examples here that I wish somebody would have taken me through when I was learning FileMaker in terms of understanding the field types, or basically how FileMaker stores the data. So if you'd like to follow along, then go ahead and make a selection from the FileMaker menu. I'm working in FileMaker 16, and you can choose, I'm going to choose a new solution for today. That came up off screen. Let me move that on screen, go to my desktop, and I'm just going to call this quite simply fields is what I'm going to call this solution. Now, one of the good things about starting with a new file each time, rather than just doing this in your main file or however many FileMaker files you work with, is it really separates things out and allows you to learn things in a nice, convenient way. Plus, you get familiar with FileMaker's environment as it comes up. For example, we automatically default into the managed database here. Now, the field types that you probably already know about, let me zoom out so I can zoom in and show those all on screen, are these right here. They seem pretty simple. Text, a number is a number, a date's a date, time's a time, timestamp, and then a container. That's the only one that could be confusing, but really it's not once you understand that the container is a blob that holds, all kinds of things. In fact, we went through this through FileMaker's environment a little bit, talking about a container can hold pretty much any document, movies, videos, audio, you name it. Then underneath the line that we have here are calculation and summary. Now you may be saying, I know what a text field is, but do you know how FileMaker stores text data, especially when you have multiple pieces of information? And a number, that really is the most simple of all of the fields when it comes to FileMaker. The text one, I'm going to show you something in this video that maybe you didn't know that's how FileMaker stores the data. Date and time as well, we're going to take a look at those because it's important to know how FileMaker stores the data that you actually input. And the container we really don't need to spend a whole lot of time on. So we're going to be taking a look at date, time, timestamp, cross-section of those, and text. So let's start off with text. Now so far, as I create this new field, we'll just call it text field for short. So far, one of the things we have not gotten into in this series, and we will be, are all of the different various options that you have for fields, and we'll be talking about how they're useful, what their implication is when you turn them on, and so forth. But right now, as a FileMaker learner, we're just looking at the field. So with the field created, FileMaker will automatically put that onto the layout for us. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick trip to the Manage, and we're going to go to the Value Lists. And in the Value Lists, I accidentally did the security because I zoomed out right there. We're going to go to Manage. We're going to go to Value Lists, and we're just going to create a very simple value list right now. Hopefully you can follow along. I'm going to use custom values, and I'm just going to put in 1, 2, and 3. And I'll just call this numbers as a value list. Super simple. I mean, this is the most simple thing you can do. We're going to have some great videos on related value lists and so forth. So first off, we're going to double check. We are in the default view, which is FileMaker's form view, and we have a text field here. And currently I can put anything I want into this field. And FileMaker is going to store the data in this field. It's a field in the database. Each record is just like an Excel spreadsheet. If I created a new record, this is just a new record in form view, and this is something else. If I want to see this as a spreadsheet, I can of course click this view, and of course what I get is each field is on each record is storing that data. But there's a key to understand about FileMaker, and as a FileMaker learner, I want you to understand this because it's what makes FileMaker so useful in terms of being able to do a ton of different things. And that is the fact that when things are stored, especially if you use a value list, things are stored in what's it's basically a return delimited list. So what we're going to do is whenever we're going to play with FileMaker's fields, we're going to put them next to each other here in this particular lesson. So I'm going to resize this field, and then I'm going to put one right here next to it. Now it's an exact copy of that same field, and I'll just put the field label above it. As we zoom in, and I'll put the inspector here really close so that I can move it close to us. So here is our first copy of the same text field, and we are going to go to, wow, FileMaker really zoomed that up for me. We're going to go to this fourth area in the inspector, the tab. We're going to change the control style to a checkbox set, and we are going to select the value options from that value list that we created called numbers. We're not going to turn on the allow entry icon. We don't really need to switch right now, but hey, it's good to know about if you want to. FileMaker added this most recently. If you're in an older version of FileMaker, you probably only have one option. That's whatever it comes with check. I think in 15 or 16, they added this new X versus check option, one or the other. Now, what we're going to need to do with this field is we are going to need to scroll this field out, and we're going to drag this one as well. And I'm going to go into browse mode now with Command B. Now currently what happens is these options that are applied to this field, what happens is as I check them, I want you to recognize that what I had in the field previously, something else, was actually added to with the value that I checked. I add 2 and it gets added. I click 3 and it gets added. I'll take off 1, and where do you think 1 is going to go? Well, when I click 1, it's going to add it there at the end. So basically what happens is FileMaker continues to stack or add values in this return delimited list, especially when you're using things such as a radio button or a drop-down list, pop-up menu. I always confuse the two. But I want to show you that FileMaker, this widget, really is just a display widget with regards to this field and what the field stores. So when you come in here, if you had written a script or if some other copy of this field existed, such as it did here, something else, and a user was able to get data into it, that data will still persist even though I changed the control style to a different type. Because now, if I had taken this field off of the layout, or let's say the original field, I just switched it into a control style and data already existed, forever, this field would probably have that data, and I would be able to check these options, and I might even know that this wasn't even there, had it been there previously and I didn't know this about FileMaker. So there's one neat thing that you need to know about the control style of a checkbox. Right now you can't tell, but I'm selected into this field. So I'm clicking anywhere in the boundaries of this area means that I'm in that field and it's active. So when we go back into browse mode and we're selecting here, if I hit the delete key, notice the delete key on this particular control takes everything out of that field. So on all of these controls that FileMaker uses, where it's just a display of what is actually stored in the field, it's good to know that if you hit the delete, and sometimes it's a 2-time hit, it'll delete that data. But then when you add this data, it actually gets added cumulatively. Likewise, when we go over into layout mode, and we use the inspector here, and we select this, and we're going to change it from a checkbox set to a radio button. Now here's another key thing about FileMaker. FileMaker really doesn't care what option you choose in terms of this control style. It's still going to treat the field the same in terms of the behavior. Because watch what happens when I choose a radio button set. And then we go into browse mode, and I'll zoom back in. Notice that all of them are checked. So FileMaker does allow this particular option. In fact, if I select on 2 right now, the behavior of the control itself says, with a radio button as opposed to a checkbox, I'm really only going to make one selection for you. So this control, the formatting that FileMaker is applying onto this field, means that when I select another option, FileMaker is going to rotate it out. But that's not how the data is actually being stored. The key here is, If I wanted to treat this radio button set like a checkbox set, all I have to do is hold down the Shift key. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select 2 and then select 3. So note that this is a very key thing. If for some reason a user actually finds that out and your intention is with this radio button control that the user can really only ever have one option, that's not true. FileMaker will clearly allow multiple options in this, because if I as a user say, oh, I want to check 1, 2, 3, now granted, 90% of users are going to only just click with the mouse and make a selection. But if I'm trying to be, I don't know, tricky or devious, and I hold down the Shift key and I've just added 2 fields to this one field where all of my programming around this field expects that there's only going to be one, you're going to have to, you know this now about the fields, and now you can apply some type of validation. You can say, if there is a return character in this field, it's invalid, I won't accept it. It means you're trying to bypass FileMaker's, or my intention of the radio button control by only having one value. So there's a way that you can do that, and we'll be taking a look at that in the section when we talk about validation, but this is something that I want you to know about fields. Likewise, in FileMaker, when we're able to connect 2 fields together across using a relationship, in most cases, we will come to the point where we understand that on both sides of the relationship, those fields will need to be the same. But that's not the case with what FileMaker has, which is called a multi-key value. Now, I'm not going to wire it up in this particular video, but for example, if on one side of a relationship, I wanted to be able to show, let's say, 5 records out of 10, and on the other side of the relationship, it's using a number as a primary key field, I can use a text field on one side, and I can use a number field on the other side, and it will show as many of those records as I want. It would basically be like, I want to see record 1, record 3, and record 4, and let's say record 10. So here's another key aspect of FileMaker's text fields. Because FileMaker's text fields can store a return delimited list of data, if the pieces of information in that text field are key values, then each of those key values will represent what you want to return through a relationship based on the other side. So if I had records on the other side of a relationship in a related table, and each one of those had a number, or even if they were a really complex key like A17-403- whatever, and we're going to see that using a UUID as a primary key is often better than actually just using a straight number. So if I had a bunch of these in this return delimited list in this text field, I get to choose how many of these values appear in this field, which determines how many things will actually show up in a portal. It's a very fundamental thing about being able to control what you want to display in a portal. So I really want you to get that. And you can do that via any of FileMaker's control widgets in terms of making selections. The same thing applies to the other control styles, as I mentioned, the pop-up menu, the drop-down list. I can change this to a pop-down menu. I can scroll it down. You think you're selecting 1, it's going to set it to 1. I can hold down Shift and select 2. Oh, maybe they changed that. It may be on the pop-up list. I'd try that if you want to. Let's try it really quickly. Drop-down list, let's see if it allows selecting multiple. Hold down Shift, hold down 3. Let's see if it accepts them all. There we go. It used to work on the pop-up menu, but they may have changed that. They may have changed your ability to hold down the Shift key. But if you're following along, you can see what I just did. This is a pop-down list or a pop-up list, drop-down menu. Again, I always get them confused. But I can make a selection here of one of these items, but I can also hold down the Shift key and select multiple. So if you're going to teach users to do that, if I want 1 and 3 in there, I can get that. All right. So I think that's good coverage of the FileMaker text fields. I'm going to check really quick. When I look over to the side, it's because I'm doing this live, and I've got questions. I've got a few of them that come in. Good. If you do have questions with regards to this content or what I'm talking about here, please put those in the chat and we'll be able to get to them. All right. Now let's take a look at date and time fields. Now they sort of group together. There's nothing so specific about a date field versus a time field other than how it's actually stored. So let's go into define database, and we will create a date field. So we've got that right there, date field, if I could spell. So we've got a date field. We're going to select and make it a date field. All of these keys are really pretty nice as you cycle through them. So if you want something to be text versus number versus date, once you get used to them, while you're in this dialog, you can see that I'm actually switching right here with the command keys. Text, no, I want date, no, I want number. That's pretty nice to actually switch through. Now, the key thing to remember about when we're programming in FileMaker, one of the biggest questions that's going to come up as a newer FileMaker developer is, well, do I use a date, do I use a time, or do I use a timestamp? I'm going to say that most of the time, when you're wanting to just track a discrete piece of time data, timestamp is the way that you want to go. It used to be that FileMaker only had date and time separately, and timestamp was added in some of the more recent versions of FileMaker. Now I'm going way back to when I used FileMaker 3 and 4 and 5. But the date and the time, you would usually have to combine them, but FileMaker did that by creating the new timestamp value. If you have not looked at FileMaker's documentation, then it's worth noting that FileMaker, when you input a date, a time, or a timestamp value, it's putting that in as a number. In fact, if you don't know this, all time on all computers typically is just an increment of a sequential value. That's all that it is. It just, where it varies is where is the start point that that particular software decided to use. I think on Linux, it's January 1st of 1970. On FileMaker, it's in the documentation and I'd have to find it, but actually, we'll go through the docs and we'll actually see what FileMaker uses, or if somebody wants to throw it in the chat, I might be able to pull it out right there from the chat, find out where it is, and we can actually see FileMaker tell us how many days have happened since the time that FileMaker starts using a date. So when we make this a date value, and we create this field, we're going to go put it back on the layout, or FileMaker is going to do it for us nicely, which I don't necessarily think is nice and don't always like, but it does do that, and you can turn that off. So here we have a date field, and of course with a date field we can use FileMaker's control style of a drop-down calendar if we want to. This drop-down calendar means that we're going to get that little widget that will actually show up if we choose this option of include icon to show and hide calendar. We turn that on and the little calendar will come up. This just makes it easier for us to select. This is a behavior that on a mobile application on FileMaker Go, it will actually use the iOS native little date picker that comes up. You'll need to set this option. Otherwise, if you just leave it as a standard edit box, and this is our standard default regular normal Joe field, we can obviously put the date into this field, and we're going to do that. So we're going to go into browse mode, and we are going to put in a date value. Now, when you input a date value, obviously it typically wants the formatting of whatever the system is set for. So in my case with the US here, it wants whatever, I forget what the date is. I'll put 9/28 and I'll put 2017. Now FileMaker will actually interpret the 17 and actually convert it for me. You can see right there. But I can also use any other separators. I can go 9.28.2017. As long as FileMaker can actually parse this information, it will actually parse it. But that's not what's actually stored in the actual field. What's stored in the field is an actual numerical value, as I stated, that's just simply incrementing by 1. So in the case of dates, it's doing it by the day. In the case of timestamps, it's doing it by the second. So we can see that by simply doing this. There's two ways that we could do this. I'm going to do this because I'm using a copy of FileMaker Pro Advanced, I have access to these tools up here. If you do not have FileMaker Advanced, you will not necessarily have the data viewer. You will need to create a field. So let's go ahead and create a field for those of you that are just using FileMaker Pro. And we'll create a field called real date. I should probably underscore these. So I'm creating a field called real date. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify that this is actually a number type, knowing that that's what FileMaker is using underneath the hood. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an AutoEnter on this field. So an AutoEnter means that I'm basically going to apply a FileMaker calculation to this field based on any other field that I want to. So it's going to be right down here, and it's one of the options that we have for a field. So we click on Options, and then as I zoom in right here, we'll zoom out of the dialog a little bit so we can see it. I'm going to check this option of calculated value. Now we're going to spend some time on how many different ways we can use AutoEnter. But what we're going to do is we are going to use one of FileMaker's coercion functions. And these are really key to know when it comes to fields and their types, because many times you need to put data into the right format in order to get FileMaker to actually do the right calculations. You will come across this all the time when you're working in FileMaker, especially when we get to the section where we deal with variables. Because a lot of things, FileMaker will by default treat them as text when you want to do computation on them based on their actual data type. And you need to coerce them. Coerce is the word that you use in programming. So we're going to type in the search area over here, we're going to type get as. So the get as functions, these are all of the functions that basically say, this is how you think of this, you know what? I don't trust what I'm actually getting from you, FileMaker, if it's a variable, a global variable, or a local variable. I think you might have turned it into some text, but I'm going to be doing some math on this, and I want to get it as a number, or I want to get it as a date. You can actually see all of them right here. We've got get as Boolean. You will use that not as much. Get as CSS, that's for converting text into a CSS format. Really doesn't apply to this conversation about fields, but get as date definitely does. Get as number. Get as SVG, again, don't worry about that one. That one applies to formatting it into the scalable vector format for text, which, okay, that was another conversation another time. We're mostly interested in get as date, get as number, get as text, get as time, and get as timestamp. And later down the road, we'll use the get URL encoded, which isn't important. The ones that deal with data are this one, this one, this one, and this one. So what we're going to do to this date field is we're going to double click and say get as number. We want to see underneath, what does FileMaker actually do to that date field? How does it treat that date field? So now we say OK, and we are going to uncheck this box right here of do not replace existing. We want to uncheck this because what happens is every time we make a change in the field that's referenced, we want FileMaker to update this calculation. So by unchecking this, that means if there's a change in any of the fields that calculation references, it will update it. So we can now see when we say OK, and FileMaker wonderfully puts that onto the layout for us, we can actually now see the real date behind the scenes. Now, remember, it's going to come up empty the first time because nothing has changed in the referenced field. What's the referenced field? The referenced field is this date field right here. And we can see I've put in 9.28.2017. Well, let's just take off the 7, and let's put the 7 back, and let's exit the field. Whenever you exit a field in FileMaker, that means you're committing the record. You're saying to FileMaker, okay, I'm ready now, take this data. You can see that what's happened is FileMaker underneath the hood is using this number in order to represent this date. It is only showing you this date from the standpoint of how do you want to see this. You need to see this in terms of something that's comfortable to you, but underneath the hood, it's actually storing it as this value. So here's a really cool trick that I learned because we're coming up on the 30 minutes and you'll be able to play with the time and the timestamp and so forth. But here's a really important lesson that I learned. How can you have FileMaker actually find out how many days there are in a month? This was when I was learning how to build a calendar way back in the 90s. It was an aha moment that every time I was using FileMaker, I thought, okay, FileMaker's storing 928.2007. No, it's not, because it has to work across all of the different formattings for date. So just using a number makes sense. In fact, let's just do a little experiment here, and let's go from 928 to 929 and see if this just increases by 1. It should go from 736600 to 736601. There you go. Plus 1 day means that it's just going to increment one more time. So when I learned this, it was so cool in FileMaker, and this is why I'm showing you this here. How can you determine how many days are in the month, 30, 31, or 28, especially for February and for leap years? Well, once somebody showed me this, it was so awesome. Here's how it works. In order to find the total number of days in a month, all you have to do is know that you can do math on your dates and timestamps. If it's just an incremental number, 736601, all you have to do is go into the first day of the next month and then subtract that by the first day of the current month. That to me was just absolutely awesome. So let's do that. We're going to put in the first day of the next month. We're going to put in 10, October 1st of 2017. All right, that gives us 736603. All right, let's go do another field now as we zoom out. And let's, I'm just going to call it first of month, just for playing. It's going to be a date field. And I won't do the conversion, but I'll create that. And then it'll allow us to actually play with this data. We'll add that to the layout, or it'll add it for us. Go into browse mode, and let's actually put that above so that makes a little bit more sense. We'll use our date field. It's returning our real date and our first of month, and we'll play right here. All right, so now let's put this one right here, 9/1/2017. All right, so now we have all of the pieces of information in order to find out, or in order to have FileMaker determine exactly how many days are in this month. We just need to do a little bit of math, and what do you think that math would be? Okay, it's basically subtracting 1. If FileMaker already knows that at the end of the month, when it gets to 30 or 31 or however many days there are, if we're on just one day beyond what that would be, we're just going to be subtracting by 1. So in order to determine this, we would create a calculation, which we'll do here, days in month. So I'm creating this calculation right there. I'm going to select a calculation type right there, and we're going to learn how pervasive FileMaker's calculation dialog box is. We're going to create that, and we are going to do some of our FileMaker math. So we are going to be able to take, and I should have named these a little bit more easier to remember. I'll have to guess which one is which because my brain is in teaching mode here. But we basically have these two date fields. I believe this one is the first one, or this one is the last one. I don't know. We'll take the first of month, and we'll subtract the, actually, let's do the other way. Date field has got October minus first of month. Name your fields a little bit easier to actually understand. Here is our calculation result. Now, this is a very important part of every FileMaker calculation that you ever write. The result that you're going to return, are you returning an actual date when you do the date of a future date minus a current date? You're not. You're just, you know that inside now, FileMaker converts that number or stores that number as just a sequential number, and now you're doing the math. And so the math means that you're returning a number, you're not returning a date. And that's a key thing when it comes to FileMaker's field types. Now there's one other thing that we need to set on this, that we currently will not necessarily get the result that we want when we make changes to the field. And we're going to go through this in another video talking about field storage, but there's one other thing I need to click on the options on this. You'll have to just follow along. This setting right here, storage options. When I click this, FileMaker is going to come up with a dialog box, and we're going to go through storage options in another video, but for right now, we need to check this box right here of do not store calculation results. Recalculate when needed, for the very reason that this is what we need. We need FileMaker to recalculate when a change is made in these other fields. Now, it'll work if we don't have this checked, and we'll talk about indexing versus non-indexed and what the implications are, but this is what we need to do for right now. So let's see what we get. Days in month. There are 30 days in this month. And if we do this and say, if we go from 11 and change this one to 10, there's 31 days in that month. And you can see that as you make these changes, it's really cool to watch this number. And so my suggestion to you, or the takeaway that you're going to have with this particular lesson is go play with the timestamps and the time values and recognize what they actually do. Let's do it really quickly here. Time field. I'll create one. We'll create that time field really quickly. And I want you to recognize this is something you have to think about when you're working with FileMaker if it's not super obvious. You put in a time, and you're thinking of time in terms of typically 12-hour and with AM and PM. FileMaker doesn't store that data as AM and PM. It just represents it as AM and PM. Now it does store the A and the P in the field for you to see, but behind the scenes it's using, again, a number. And we can always see that by going to this time field that we threw on this now becoming quickly messy layout. But we can put in a time, and FileMaker will work on a 12-hour period. But it doesn't mean that it stops at 12 hours. So in a 24-hour clock, we start at 0, right? We go 0, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 5, 6, all the way up. So if I put in a 4, FileMaker is actually storing this as 4 in the morning, as opposed to 4 o'clock, which would be 1600 hours. Now again, in order to see this, you're going to need to actually use that get as number and take a look at what this actually shows. And there's one other thing we need to see with regards to formatting. FileMaker on all of your fields is going to format them by default as a standard type. If you want to see data in a different way, in other words, everything that FileMaker is doing here with the fields is displaying data to you. And we're going to learn that displaying data can be totally different than how you store data. But here in the display equation, I'm going to bring up the inspector with Command-I or Control-I if it's not showing on yours. We're going to go to this fourth area of the inspector, and we're going to go to the very bottom part. Let's see if I can bring the database, put those up at the same, there we go. This format option under the data formatting, it's the lowest part in the fourth area of the inspector. When you have an item selected, FileMaker is typically going to show you these little widgets right here. So if I select this date, notice that this widget actually changes right here from the time formatting to the date formatting. And if I had a number selected, it would be this one. If I had a container selected, it would be this one. So we can see as I hover here, graphic, time, date, what have you. Well, you get full control over how data is displayed, but you do not get control over how data is stored, at least when it comes to these field types that we're discussing. Know that the time is stored as a number. Date is stored as a number. That's very critical. So when I select this time field, this format of as entered can be switched to hours, minutes, seconds, hours, minutes, minutes, seconds, hours, and minutes. You get the idea. So if I want to see what the formatting, if I want to see how FileMaker additionally stores this data, and let me shrink these up so we can see them. Didn't want to scroll there. Wanted to do that. Here's where I get to set whether I want to see this as 24 or what have you. Play with these. Change them to 24 hours, to 12-hour AM, PM, but always remember, this is only what FileMaker is showing. It's not what it's actually storing. So we can see that. I wish I had enough time to add a field here of being able to do this. So this is formatted now as hours, minutes, second, and it's showing the PM. I can choose whether to not show that PM or whether, whatever I want to show. What I put into the field was actually 16. I can put anything beyond 24 hours. We know that FileMaker, or that in a 24-hour clock, it goes from 0 up to 23, 23 being 11 o'clock. But it doesn't matter. FileMaker doesn't care. I can put in 56, and it will still display a time because FileMaker is simply just going to continually roll over every group of 24. So if I was to put in, I forget what, I'm not going to do the math here in my head. I'm terrible with doing math in my head. 23 plus 23, what is that? That's 46. If I put 46, it's basically the same thing. Let's see if it does. 46, 10 p.m., I did my math wrong probably, is the same thing as me putting in 10 p.m. or 2200 hours. So yeah, 42 would be the double of 22. So basically, that's what you need to understand about this, and convert these to their number equivalents, and then that's how you have a much better time as a new FileMaker learner of working with the math on numbers that you need to, finding the difference between two times or the difference between two dates, knowing that you're doing it from the standpoint of numbers rather than thinking of it in terms of the abstract display that FileMaker uses makes it much easier to understand. All right, so I went 5 minutes over. Let me zoom out here and let's switch over to our comments and see what we have come up here in terms of questions about today's particular lesson. Hey, HBH group, how you doing? Thanks a lot. I have a lot to ask about. Sent you file. Yes, Angli or Angie Ali. I will be getting to that, looking to the file. I'm busy doing all of my normal work, plus these videos, plus my regular videos. Sorry about that. All right, date start at, there we go. So Greg actually put into the comments, and here's something that you can do. Here's another thing. Why don't you find out how many days it has been since FileMaker starts tracking date fields. So if FileMaker starts on January 1st of year 1, which we can see in the comments, I don't know, it may not be in the comments. They may have scrolled up for you. If you're on the live feed, let me switch over so you can see what I'm actually looking at myself. It is that right there, that dates start on January 1. That's probably not in the feed. If that's the case, how would you figure out how many days have happened since January 1, year 1? And I'll give you a clue. FileMaker, as I show the data viewer, has a lot of different date functions that you can use. One of them in particular is get current date. So I'm going to give you that clue. Now you figure it out. How do you figure out how to find out how many days have happened from today since when FileMaker actually starts tracking dates? And that's from January 1st, year 1. Unlike Unix, which uses 1970. All right, and any more questions? Say yes, days since. Question. I've always been a little foggy, I think that's on the feed, on whether to use a proper calc field versus another field type, e.g. a text field with a calculation on it. What are the pros and cons of each approach? HBH group, that's a really good question, and I'm assuming that you're talking about the proper function. In order to apply to a field, we are going to take a look in a future video about decisions that you have to make of data storage versus data display. And as a new FileMaker learner, one of the things that FileMaker, in a lot of the other FileMaker videos that you'll find out there, and in a lot of the FileMaker actual files that they provide, they teach you to just sort of arbitrarily make a new calculation field. Just make a new calculation field. And many times those calculation fields end up becoming unstored, which to a new FileMaker developer seems okay because the database is completely fast. But once the database grows beyond a certain point and starts to get used more heavily, unstored calculations can be the death of a FileMaker database, because users are trying to do simple things like combine a first name and combine a last name, and they just want to display the full name together. So they just make a calculation. That's what FileMaker does. You just make it. There are other ways to display data, and a critical lesson to learn in FileMaker, we'll be doing this in a future video, is how do you distinguish between what do I store as data and what do I display as data? Because there are many other display methods other than calculated fields. It's not the only way to get FileMaker to display something. And if you can treat your database from the standpoint of it's just supposed to store my data, but the user interface is supposed to display my data, making the distinction will really help out. My suggestion is that you can always use an AutoEnter calculation. AutoEnter calculations are always going to perform much better than unstored calculations. That's the quick answer to that. But there are other ways, such as using global variables or even local variables, which we'll get into in terms of storing data. So Steve Hampson said, if you don't want the user to edit the field, always go with a calc field. For the purpose of display, you can do that, but you can always enforce data be in the format that you want. And we can do that with a combination of validation and AutoEnter calculations. So for example, over in our database. Just as a quick example, we'll hide the data viewer there and we will zoom in. Currently, from the standpoint of input in this time field, a user can come in and they can put anything. They can put 10 p.m. They could put in 10 a.m. And FileMaker attempts to do its best to, based on what the user inputs, actually convert this to the right format. A user can also come in at this stage because it's a regular FileMaker field and just put in 46, and FileMaker has to convert that to whatever it has to convert. Well, in order for me to actually ensure that what FileMaker puts into the field, or it's underneath, it's going to convert and always use it as a number. But if I want to, because this doesn't make sense, a user clicks in, Joe puts this in as, for some reason, 46, and then Mary comes over and she's like, okay, 10 p.m. Well, that needs to be changed to 11 p.m. She selects into the field, 46? What the heck is 46? Mary's completely confused. It's stopped her and it's thrown her off of the flow she was in. We will enforce that this data actually gets stored as something that we want it to be stored as, a la 10, and typically 10 like this, 0, 0, and then 0, 0. We will convert that using an AutoEnter, and then we can also use a validation in order to make sure that what gets entered, so that when a user clicks into the field, what they see is basically the same thing as what FileMaker is going to display. And we'll take a look at that when we look at more in depth AutoEnter and the validation options that we have. All right, and a wrap-up question that we have here. Let's see, we've got CVAM, thanks. You can always make the text field and AutoEnter check calc. You guys even answered it yourself there on the chat. All right, so that is going to give us a wrap for today. You know what? If you are learning FileMaker and you have questions, not just about this content, but on any of my other videos, I highly encourage you to throw comments down below. Feel free to ask your questions in these lessons. If you're able to watch it live, you can come on the chat and, of course, get your question answered real time while I'm recording. If you're watching this after the fact, your questions are still very valid. Put them in the comments down below. Even if there's something that I say that you have a suggestion that I have not even covered that has been a solution for you, put the comment there because that helps other people out as well as I go through this series. So if you would like to be notified of these videos, you can do that via YouTube. You're going to click the subscribe that's going to come up here pretty quick, or you can always head over to my website, which if you're interested in more in-depth, you can always go to my website right there, FileMakerMagazine.com. You'll see all kinds of interesting topics that I cover. I release a weekly video doing something about FileMaker, and it's just a place where you can go more in-depth and learn all kinds of really cool tips and tricks. But that's going to give us a wrap for today's video. So again, subscribe, it'll come up right here, and the next video in this series will come up right here. All right, happy file making.